What's up guys, my name is Andre and welcome to a new video. While my computer is being shipped, I thought I was going to, try to edit a video using this Core 2 Duo E6300, which is literally the first Core 2 Duo that was ever released. Right here we have an assortment of Pentium 4 CPUs, and the interesting thing about these CPUs, because I don't think that these CPUs are interesting anyway to the retro community at this point, is something about silicon, about lithography. So right here we have a Pentium 4 3 GHz on socket 478. Alright, this one has 512 kilobytes of cache. This is a Northwood die. In other words, this is a 130 nanometer chip. The same, pretty much the same architecture was moved on Intel's talk cycle to a 90 nanometer lithography, pretty much. So this is a 3 GHz Pentium 4 with 1 megabyte of cache, and this one is running on 90 nanometers. And then when Intel got its bearings on the 775, they ported some of their CPUs from 478 to 775, and this is one of them right here. This is a slightly modified version of the same CPU, because you see this CPU right here, this is a 32-bit CPU. This one is a 64-bit CPU. See that little 1 in there? This usually means that the CPU, the die, has gone through sort of a revision. So the original Pentium 4 530 pretty much is the same thing, 3 GHz, 1 meg of cache, but it is a 32-bit only CPU, and this is a 64-bit CPU. However, it still holds the same lithography, the same clock, the same bus speed, and the same cache. And then right here we have pretty much an upgrade of the same architecture. So we have the 600 series from Intel, which the 630 model is still holding the same 3 GHz, the same 800 MHz FSB bus, but now the CPU has 2 megabytes of cache. And then the little 1 right after it means that the CPU has gone through another lithography reduction. So this one is a 90 nanometer CPU, this one is a 65 nanometer CPU. This is the later Cedar Mill Pentium 4s. So until this point, this is your essential normal Pentium 4. Hot, slow, but then when we got to the 631 and 641 series of chips, they're still slow Pentium 4s, but they're not hot anymore because these chips have been reduced to 65 nanometers. So whereas these chips would normally output anywhere from 84 to 95 watts of TDP, these chips, because they're 65 nanometer chips, they're only going to output normally top 73 watts, but normally the heat output from these chips is going to be 65 watts, which I find to be very, very interesting. So there's that. This is pretty much how Intel was doing things back in this time in the Pentium 4 era, which was essentially mid to late 2005 and early 2006. Intel was still messing about with their Pentium 4 CPUs, even though the Core 2 architecture was basically around the corner. So right now, what you're looking right now, it is essentially the first Core 2 Duo processor that was ever released. This is the Core 2 Duo E6300. It is a CPU that runs basically at less than half the clock of a Pentium 4 of the era, because we had some Pentium 4s of this era running at 3.8 GHz. Look at the staggering clock speed of this one. This is literally the first Core 2 Duo that was ever released. And the CPU, it is miles ahead of any Pentium D and any Pentium 4, running at half the clock speed of the CPUs of the time, and outputting just 2/3 of the heat. This is pretty much the marvel of the Core architecture, and this is pretty much the only case where we're actually praise Intel for looking back and actually doing things right. They pretty much learned their mistake with the Pentium 4 and NetBurst architecture and moved away from it on late 2005, early 2006, pretty much, with the with the Core 2 architecture, which essentially it is an iteration of the Pentium Pro architecture from 1995. In fact, I do believe that the first CPUs were essentially Pentium Pros from 1995 adapted to be pin compatible with 775, because what we do know is that when when transistors are made smaller, they output less heat. Less voltage has to be driven through them in order to achieve a certain clock speed. And because the Pentium Pros from 1995, which the core architecture was based, under quotes, off, they are like 500 nanometer chips. That would explain the sort of low clock speed and high voltage that was necessary to drive these CPUs. And so when Intel got down and reduced the transistor size from those CPUs from 500 nanometers to 65, they were able to push the same core to 1.86 gigahertz, and pretty much you can know the whole story from there. Because what people do not know is that the early Core 2 Duos like this, they were not they were not two cores in one die. They were two physical packages separated into the package. So like imagine that you have two dies sitting like side by side. If I have a socket 462 CPU laying around to show you, so the thermites are pretty much eating the wall, so ignore the dust. So imagine that we have this silicon die right here. We have two of these under this IHS on that CPU, and when Intel mastered the ability to put two cores into one die on 65 nanometer, then we got the Core 2 Quads, the Kensfield core, which is a 65 nanometer quad core CPU with two dual core dies sitting right beside each other. So there's that. This is a video that I was wanting to do because my computer is out. Levi was able to find another GTX 970, the exact 970 that I have. He was able to find another one, and so I sold my motherboard with the i7 920 in order to afford another GTX 970. So I already talked about this on the last vlog, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. You can go watch the vlog that I released, I think 1 or 2 days ago, and that's pretty much it. So continuing about the fact that these CPUs are basically Pentium Pros running on 65 nanometers, many of the hardware bugs that were present on the Pentium Pro from 1995, they were still present on the Core 2 Duo from 2006. This is what raises my theory even more that these chips, the four Core 2 Duos, are nothing more than sort of revamped Pentium Pros that had their lithography reduced to 65 nanometers out of 500 and clocked higher. Because I mean, imagine back in the days of the Pentium Pro, a normal voltage to go through those CPUs was like 5 to 3.3 volts. 5 volts going through a piece of silicon, but that makes perfect sense. I mean, what CPU is this one? This is a Duron 1300. Let's go up on the internet and search about it. So this is a 180 nanometer chip released on January of 2002, and the voltage that runs through the CPU is 1.75 volts. So you can kind of see that. I think this chip was kind of overheated. You can see the burned paper under it. At least this guy was sensible enough to put the warranty sticker below the CPU, not just right beside it. This is something I hate about these computer shops. This is something that only amateurs do. See these scratches on the IHS? Yeah, that was my sort of attempt to remove a fucking warranty sticker. The worst thing that these guys would do on that time was to fucking put warranty stickers on the IHS, ignoring the fact, ignoring what the fucking IHS is supposed to do. It's supposed to increase the contact area between the die and the heatsink, because we got this piece of of aluminum that's sitting on top of this. So the bigger the area you have between these two parts, the better the thermal conductivity is going to be. That's why we have IHSs. So the IHS actually plays a double role. It protects the die from chips because, as you can see, this die, yeah, there's a chip, quite literally in the corner right there. I think you can see it. So this chip is dead. It's not going to work anymore because the die, the silicon die, is cut exactly, precisely to size. There's not much silicon headroom around the corners. So if you literally chip the corners of these dies, they stop working. So the IHS not only increases the contact area between the silicon die and the heatsink, it also protects the die when mounting the heatsink on top of the CPU, because if you chip the corner of the die, the CPU is dead. And this is why deleting is so dangerous. Well, that's enough ramble for a video. This fan is completely broken. And now I'm going to go ahead and spend my next 5 hours rendering this video on this Core 2 Duo E6300 because this is a full HD video. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.